Hello and welcome to Tuts Plus. My name is Martin Perhiniak. The aim of this tutorial is to help you understand how to work with color profiles in Photoshop. But before we get to color profiles, first I have to make sure you are aware of color modes. I already had a video here on Tuts Plus covering that part, but just to remind you, there's RGB and CMYK color modes, which are probably the most important ones for us. RGB colors are mixed and created in the way monitors work, using light to represent colors. Therefore, RGB is perfect for screen design. CMYK, on the other hand, uses the same way of mixing colors as printers. So if you are designing something with the intent of publishing outside of the screen, you should make sure that it looks correct in CMYK color profile. There's a very important part in Photoshop called color settings under the edit menu, where you will be able to find a lot of options. First of all, you will probably see it like this, the dialog box, but then if you click on more options, you will even see more options. And of course, you can always see preview in the background. So if it's applied to the image that you have open in Photoshop, you can see your changes automatically apply in the background. First of all, there are some presets from the settings that you can choose, and I explain these in more detail below the video. So if you want to check each of these, I have written a short description for all of them. But these are basically just a set of options applied here in the color settings. So you can always make changes and you can even save your own settings or set of options. The first area in the color settings dialog box is called working spaces. The working space is used for documents that are not color managed and for newly created documents. So if you create a new document, for example, or if you open something that doesn't have any color profiles assigned to it, then these are the color profiles that are going to be used. So for RGB color mode, Photoshop will pick sRGB color profile and assign to any unassigned documents or new documents. And the same applies to CMYK color mode images, again for new images, and any image that doesn't have any color profile assigned to it will be turned into the US Web coated color profile. You will also probably have the sRGB option set here by default for RGB. It's fine to keep it for consumer purposes, but it does not give you a very rich color palette. It would be a good idea, especially for web designers and photographers, to go with Adobe RGB 1998, which offers a wider color range. If you are shooting specifically for print, Adobe RGB offers more range and versatility in the images taken. But there are more and more photographers tend to use again another option called the Pro Photo RGB, which is again here in the list. So there's Pro Photo RGB. If you have the more options selected at the bottom, you will also see a description part, which will always give you a hint of the options that you select. Like for Pro Photo RGB, it tells us that it provides a very large RGB gamut, some of it actually being outside of the human vision. Working with this profile, however, has its disadvantages, as you will run into problems once you start converting your images to color spaces with narrower color range. So just to make sure you understand the difference between these most important color profiles, I created this image where you can see, first of all, the whole gamut of human color perception. So this big colorful blob in the background shows all the colors that we can actually perceive. And then on this, we can see the 4 color profile regions. First of all, the cyan color is the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or CMYK color profile. So that's the area that the most commonly used inks can cover. So that's what's used mainly for print. And then compared to that, we have the sRGB color space, which is the yellow triangle. And this triangle is covering different parts of the gamut of human color perception. So it has, for example, much deeper, more saturated blues and purples, also more hot reds, and also more saturated greens. But the CMYK is stronger, for example, with cyan colors. and also a little bit with oranges. Here you can see that little triangle, which is not included in the sRGB color profile. Then compared to sRGB, we have Adobe RGB 1998 that shows that it's quite similar to sRGB but still has more colors covered, mainly from blues, cyans, greens and oranges. And then last but not least, we have the ProPhoto RGB, which covers a lot more colors. It goes all the way to the end here in the corner, covering all the reds, and it actually goes beyond the human color perception. So it includes even more colors on the top, where we have the greens, and also here on the bottom left, where we have the blues. So that's good to know. And following this, you have to make the decision what is the workspace that you prefer to use. Once again, sRGB is great if you mainly work for web, but if you are a photographer or if color integrity is very essential for you, then probably Adobe RGB is the best option to choose. And if you are a pro, then you can use the ProPhoto RGB. I mean, if you really know what you are doing in Photoshop and how to work with colors, then you can also work with ProPhoto RGB. Let me just set this to Adobe RGB here. And there is a warning here on the top. It says unsynchronized. Your Creative Suite applications are not synchronized for consistent color. To be able to synchronize it, we actually have to go into Bridge. So if I click on OK here and I go to Bridge, there under Edit menu we can also find color settings. And this is very important because if you want to synchronize your options, you have to make sure you choose the option here and then apply it. So once you click on Apply, it will synchronize to all your Creative Cloud applications. So in case you make changes in Photoshop color settings, make sure you save that as a custom preference, and then you will be able to choose that from here in Bridge. And once you select that and apply it, it will be consistent throughout all your Adobe applications. But now let's go back to Photoshop and again just go back to color settings, because the next part is very important, is the color management policies. So once again, for each color mode, RGB, CMYK and grayscale images, we can choose what we want Photoshop to do whenever it opens an image. But before we decide which one of these three we should select, let's just talk about color profiles in general. So what is a color profile? It's called an ICC profile, which is a set of data that characterizes a color input or output device or a color space. And to be able to understand the color management workflow, let me just show you how a document is handled by the color management system. Whenever you bring an image in to Photoshop, it will probably have the input profile, which is describing the color space of the input device, which can be a camera or a scanner or so many other devices. Then you have B, which is the color management system. In our case, that's Photoshop and the policies that we set up there. So Photoshop color management system will identify the document's actual colors. Then it will probably have to show it to us on the screen. So the C is going to be our monitor's profile, which tells the color management system how to translate the document's numeric values to the monitor's color space. In case you want to have a good color management workflow, make sure you calibrate your screen as well. And for your calibrated screen, you will get a profile and use that profile in your workflow as well. And last but not least, we have D, which is the output. That's the output device profile. The color management system, again, translates the document's numeric values to the color values of the output device, so the correct appearance of colors is going to be printed. And that is probably the most important thing to remember, that whenever you have an image which is coming from the camera, it will go through these changes, processing from an input color profile to a monitor color profile and then to an output color profile. And in the process, you even change color modes. So from RGB, you might move to CMYK. If you want to check the color profile, you can also use the status bar in Photoshop. So let me just go back to my document, and here in the status bar I can switch to document profile. So if I select that, I will be able to see which color profile is assigned to my document. So now that we know that, we can get back to the color settings and the color management policies, and let's have a look at these three options here. So what if we choose off? If off is selected, then the files you create will not have the ICC profiles embedded in them. That may cause your files to vary in color on different displays. It's generally recommended that you leave it on, so off is rarely advisable to use. Then the second option is preserve embedded profiles. This is a very useful option because this will leave the ICC profiles of the files you open. In case you open a file which does not have an ICC profile, it will use your current settings to temporarily embed one. So the current settings set in the working spaces. However, it will not save the color profile to the file. So with this option on, you can have multiple files with different color profiles opened at the same time, and Photoshop will treat every one of them separately. If you change the option to convert to working RGB, then what happens is that every time you open a file, this will convert the ICC values to your working space settings. So in this case, no matter what the color profile in the image is set to, it will always use my working space Adobe RGB color profile. However, if your file had no ICC profile to begin with, when you have this option selected, it will remain that way. So you will have to manually assign the profile to them. And the new files you create in Photoshop will inherit the values again from the working space settings. I prefer to use the preserve embedded profiles, and I don't like Photoshop to ask whenever it finds a mismatch or a missing profile, although it might be useful to have them on. But I'm pretty confident that I don't lose colors on the way because I have this option selected for all images to preserve the embedded profiles, and I only start to mess around with them if I know that my output device will need that. So I don't really need these warnings. I usually turn them off. Now, there's also a very important option. If we go to the edit menu, we can find assign profile and convert to profile. So these are the options that you can use once you open an image, which in this case came in as sRGB. And I would like to turn this into Adobe RGB, for example. So what's the difference between these two? The convert to profile can be used to move your entire image into a newly defined color space while preserving the color relationships. So let's have a look at this. And here you can see that Adobe's conversion engine will use one of the rendering intents, so one of these four, and although it will physically alter your file, it will retain colors as best as possible using the new profile for output, but maybe you might see some clipping in the colors. So we can check that. If I choose preview and turn it on and off, you can see our source is sRGB and our destination is Adobe RGB. You can see in the background maybe a little shifting colors, but it's almost impossible to tell. So convert profile will try to maintain the original colors while turning the image into a new color profile. So that's why it's convert, because it's a conversion. So it tries to maintain the original colors as close as possible. On the contrary, if we go to assign profile, so if we choose the other option under the edit menu, then here we will see difference, because this will alter the colors and correct them for a specific device in a given color space. So this option does not alter the file, but the output using the new profile may look very different color-wise. So if I choose working RGB, which is now Adobe RGB, you can see how much different it will look. So if I turn off preview, that was before, and this is after. So it will try to simulate the color intensity of the Adobe RGB image compared to the original sRGB. So that's assign profile, and in this case as well, my document profile will change. So if I click on OK, now it's set to Adobe RGB. Of course, I can go back. So as long as I have it in my history, I can choose step backward and then it will again refresh back to sRGB. So it's up to you, whichever you want to do, assign the profile or convert. You have to remember, convert will keep the colors as they look like, while assign a profile will completely change the way your colors look. And last but not least, another very important option is under the view menu, the proof colors. So in case you would like to simulate colors in your document without actually changing the color profile, you can choose this option. So if I select that, it will actually simulate CMYK colors. So that's because I have under the proof setup the working CMYK selected. But here I can choose any of the other options. So even I can go into the custom options and choose any of the devices that I would like to simulate. So this is a great way to preview how your image will look like once you print it on a specific printer for which you have a color profile. Remember, you also have to make sure your screen is calibrated to get the best result, to make sure the image that you see on your screen will match the printed image as close as possible. What you can also do here in the customize proof condition is to simulate the paper color, which will simulate the white shades of paper on your screen. And you can also have the simulate black ink, which will show you how dark your dark places will be when created with printer ink. And generally, whichever rendering intent you use, black point compensation is an option I would recommend to keep on, once again to make sure the dark places will be rendered properly. So you can here also check how your image will look when you change the rendering intent. And if you want to read about these, again, you can find more information about these in the color settings description part. I would set it back to relative colorimetric because that's the default option. And remember, whenever you work in RGB mode and you wish to use all the filters and options available in that mode, you can still preview your image as it's going to look like once it's printed if you use this proof setup. So I can use Command Y or Control Y to turn it off and see again the RGB colors, or turn it back on to see my printed colors on my screen. And that's all I wanted to show you in this tutorial. Hopefully now you have a much better understanding of what color profiles do in Photoshop and how to handle them properly. Of course, color management is a huge topic and you can really dive deep into it if you are interested. And I only wanted to give you an overview of this topic with this tutorial. And I hope I succeeded in that. So, thanks a lot for your attention again, and if you want to learn more, make sure you join me next time as well here on Tuts Plus. So thanks again, and see you soon.